The 5 mistakes all club players make. Over the next couple of lectures, we're going to look at the 5 mistakes all club players make, and how to avoid them. My aim is to help you find stronger moves in your own games and punish your opponent's mistakes. Let's jump right in with Mistake 1, reacting to your opponent. The first mistake I see club players make all the time is reacting to what their opponent has just played. While we should try to understand what they are up to, we shouldn't let them dictate play. Emmanuel Lasker, black, has just played queen from d8 to b6, avoiding the exchange of queens. What would you play here? Over half the players I show this position to choose queen e2. The logic is that black's last move prepares rook from a8 to d8, attacking the queen and occupying the open file. Therefore, white should move the queen and get ready to play rook from f1 to d1. This is a case of reacting to our opponent's move. Queen e2 doesn't lose, doesn't drop material, but it does see the initiative disappear. Instead of worrying about what black wants to do next, look at what you can do right now. White controls the d file and the e5 knight is loose. Alekhine played queen d6. I imagine you would have no problem finding that move, but what's so good about it? Firstly, it's a forcing move. The queen has moved to a more active square with tempo as the e5 knight must be defended. A move like rook from f8 to e8 is no good because white has knight h6 check. Pawn takes knight, queen takes knight on f6, shattering black's king position. Secondly, the queen will be able to quickly switch to g3, creating a threat of mate on g7. Again, this move will be with tempo, as black must react to it immediately. Thirdly, the queen has vacated a square for one of her rooks to occupy. A later rook from f1 to d1 will vastly improve the activity of that rook. Also, the rooks are now connected, meaning they protect one another. In the game, Alekhine's attack just flowed from here. In fact, Lasker's queen b6 was probably the losing move. While this move isn't too tough to find, it illustrates principles that will help you find strong moves in other positions. Remember, don't just react to what your opponent is doing but focus on what you can do. Look for moves that force your opponent to react to a threat. The attack on knight here. Bring pieces to more active or important squares, generally in the center. Allow you to reroute your piece to a more threatening square, queen d1 d6 g3. Improve your other pieces, the rooks in this case. There's no universal rule for finding good chess moves, but if you bear the above principles in mind, you will consistently achieve active positions and put your rivals under maximum pressure. The secret of Paul Morphy's magic. I hope you're enjoying your chess. Today, I'd like to cover another mistake all club players make. Mistake 2, making assumptions. Most of the time, we see this with captures and sacrifices. Players assume that, because they've taken a piece, their opponent is going to recapture it on the next move. Or, because they've offered a piece sacrifice, their opponent has to take it. Here's an example from a game played by Paul Morphy, one of the chess greats. Morphy, playing black, has just put his knight on e4, threatening f2. White could just castle, but he thought, I can capture the knight, Morphy will recapture, then I castle. This leaves black with doubled, isolated c-pawns. What happened? Bishop takes e4, queen h4. An in-between move. Black attacks f2 and the bishop. Now, if white castles, Morphy can take the bishop with his queen, keeping the strong pawn on d5. Play continued. Queen e2, determined to wreck black's pawn structure. Pawn takes bishop, bishop e3. Another mistake based on an assumption. White desperately wants to neutralize the aggressive bishop aiming at his kingside, so offers a trade. Black must either move the bishop away from this diagonal or exchange it, right? Bishop g4. No. Paul Morphy increases the pressure, attacking the defender of the bishop. Note, the f2 pawn isn't really defending as it's pinned. If queen d2, rook d8 threatens the queen and mate on d1. White resigned soon after queen c4, bishop takes on e3. We need to be especially careful about sacrifices made without check, as our opponent has time to counter with an attack of their own. Here's an example taken from a club game. White's queen is attacked, but that didn't stop him playing knight h5 check. The assumption being that pawn takes knight, queen g5 check, king h8, queen takes on h5, is going to be dangerous for black. As it turns out, black can accept the sacrifice, but he'd have to be feeling brave and be very sure of his analysis. Instead, he played the simple king h8. Now white has two pieces under attack. Black got an advantage just by ignoring the sacrifice. A few moves later, this position was reached after queen f4, f5, e takes f6, queen takes queen, knight takes queen, knight takes on f6. White should just retreat the bishop to d3, but decided to mix things up with bishop takes on g6, making the assumption black would take, and he'd get two pawns and a rook for knight and bishop. Instead, black played knight g8, revealing an attack on the f4 knight. With two pieces, and a pawn, under attack, white was losing material. Notice how this also follows on from mistake 1, reacting to your opponent. The reactionary move would have been to capture the pieces offered, whether a recapture, trade or sacrifice. Learning points. Don't assume your opponent must make a certain move. Unless they are in check, they probably have a ton of options. If your opponent captures a piece, offers a trade or a sacrifice, take a minute to consider if you have an in-between move to put more pressure on them. Hopefully these tips will help you in your games. The Art of Checkmates from nowhere. Today's mistake all club players make is a big one. Mistake 3, neglecting king safety. This might sound like a basic mistake, but you'd be surprised how vulnerable the king can be. This lesson will show you how to spot attacking opportunities and take advantage of them. This position is from the classic field tenor game. White has just played knight b3 attacking our bishop. He will be checkmated 5 moves later. So, what should we notice about this position? Firstly, we are far ahead in development. Essentially, white has castled and put a knight on b3 while we have castled, developed all our minor pieces and got a more active queen compared to our opponents. Secondly, the white king is kind of his own on the king side. Only the bishop can get to that side of the board quickly. On the other hand, we have a knight and bishop there and can swing the queen over too. Our e4 pawn is also helping by denying white use of the d3 and f3 squares. We are more active and so should consider an attack. Now, what threats can we make? To get at the king we will need to bring in more pieces and perhaps open lines by attacking the pawns. Imagine we had some free moves and placed the queen on g4 and the bishop on f3 or h3. We would be threatening queen takes g2 mate, and if g3 then queen to h3 or f3, and mate the next move. The bishop is occupying the g4 square though, and we haven't got time to move it because of knight takes bishop. However, if we create a threat, we might be able to buy the time we need. What about bishop f3 and bishop h3? If white takes our c5 bishop, we can play queen g4 and force mate. But what if he takes the light-squared bishop? After bishop h3, white doesn't have to capture, he can bring a piece to defend with bishop f4. And we still have two pieces on prize. Bishop f3 has an advantage over bishop h3 as pawn takes bishop allows pawn takes pawn, and we keep our g2 threats. For example, king h1, queen h3, rook g1, bishop d6. You have to find this move, and mate follows on h2. So far, so good. But we also need to analyze the line played in the game, bishop f4. A sensible move by white. We have two pieces on prize and he is planning to block the g-file from the queen. Queen g4, bishop g3. Now what? We have two pieces on prize, but it's important to note that white cannot take the f3 bishop nor can the g3 bishop move. Also, if h3 is played, we can take the g3 bishop because the f2 pawn is pinned. This allows us a bit of time, but we must make maximum use of it or our attack will run out of steam. The g2 pawn, square, is the weak spot, so we need to attack it with another piece. Knight h5. Knight takes bishop, knight f4, knight takes e4 pawn. Time for the finishing blow. Something like, bishop takes g2 is too slow. White will gain time and improve his pieces with queen d2, attacking the knight. Combine the idea of attacking the g2 square with your checkmate patterns and you should find the beautiful sacrifice. Queen h3. If white leaves the queen, mate on g2 follows, and pawn takes queen is met by knight takes pawn, checkmate. What I'd like you to remember from this game is, a lead in development and an unprotected opponent's king are signals to start an attack. We want to attack as quickly as possible and should be willing to sacrifice material for speed. We should also consider sacrificing material to vacate important squares, like queen g4 in the game, or break open the enemy pawn cover. Advanced pawns can be a great help in attack. Put as much pressure on the opponent's weakness g2 in the game, as you can. I hope this helps you create powerful attacks in your own games. How to double your attacking power. Today's lesson will show you how to inject more power into your moves by avoiding one mistake. Mistake 4. Not looking for double attacks. Creating multiple threats is a quick way to give your opponent a real headache and increase the chance of them making a game-losing mistake. Start looking for double attacks at every move and you'll put your rival under incredible pressure, and avoid running into one yourself. Remember, the threat doesn't have to win material, it could have a positional goal such as wrecking their pawn structure or restricting a piece. Here is a great example. In this game, white notices our c4 pawn is pinned against the bishop on b5 and plays b4. Which attacks our knight and, if we retreat, wins the pawn. Not only will it win the pawn, our knight will also be on the awkward b7 square. However, there is a creative solution: pawn takes pawn en passant. Doesn't this lose a piece? No, remember every move changes something about the position, and white's b4 opened up the long diagonal a1 h8, allowing us some tactical tricks. If bishop takes bishop, we open the diagonal completely by knight g4 check. Pawn takes knight, bishop takes knight. We're a piece down, but we're attacking the a1 rook, d2 knight and b5 bishop. We're going to win our material back and we have a passed pawn on b3. Let's follow the game. White played knight takes bishop and we exploit the open diagonal with knight takes d5 pawn. So, we have two pawns for our bishop, we're attacking the a1 rook, the e3 pawn and threatening to fork queen and rook. After rook takes knight, I know many club players would take the rook, it's an automatic response to instantly recapture, and mistake 2 in this series. You will win many games if you remember to always look for an in-between move first. Knight takes pawn on e3. Note the queen cannot protect the a5 rook from a1 as the square is guarded by our bishop. Queen takes pawn losing, but many people would play it. Knight c4 was necessary. After queen takes b3, knight takes rook check, knight takes knight, queen takes rook, white has 3 minor pieces for 2 rooks and 2 pawns, not enough. Now he thinks he can win back some pawns. Bishop takes pawn, rook fe8, skewering the bishops, but can white escape? Bishop takes pawn, rook takes bishop, bishop takes rook, queen a8. Threatening mate on g2, the bishop on b8 is lost, and white will have to give up more material soon. Key lessons. Look for lines opened or pieces left unguarded after your opponent's move. Exploit ways to make a move with tempo, as with knight takes d5. Look out for in-between moves. Knight takes e3. If 2 unprotected pieces are in a line, or a knight fork away, see if you can win them. Rook fe8. Find squares that allow you to attack 2 pieces, squares, simultaneously. Queen a8. Use these ideas in your games and you will consistently cause problems for your opponents, leading to some very satisfying wins. Mikhail Tal's favorite attacking factor. Here we go with the 5th mistake all club players make. Mistake 5, leaving the king in the center. While this may be seen as a beginner's mistake, it really isn't. Players of all strengths prefer to develop their other pieces if their king looks safe in the center. As we're about to see, however, appearances can be deceptive. Chess genius Mikhail Tal used to say for however long his opponent's king stayed in the center, he would prioritize finding ways to attack it. To give you some ideas of how to achieve this, we'll look at another lesson that teaches you how a GM thinks. This position is taken from a Caro-Kann defense played between 2 grandmasters, Pablo Riccardi and Daniel Campora. White has just played bishop g5, setting a tiny trap black was never going to fall for. The natural move. Bishop e7 allows knight d6 check, exploiting the pin to wreak havoc in black's position. Instead, black replied with the logical f6. The bishop will have to retreat and black will be able to pressure e5 and eventually gain space in the center. E takes f6, g takes f6, bishop h4, c takes d4. Now, d3 is threatened, trapping the bishop, but white has it all in hand. Notice how he maintained the pin on f6 with bishop h4. Knight fe5. Protecting the c4 knight, in case of d3, opening up the d1 h5 diagonal for the bishop to move to and claiming a powerful central square. Knight takes knight on c4, knight takes knight on c6, pawn takes knight, bishop takes knight. Now black just wants to move his bishop, solidify his center and he should have a good game. Bishop e7, rook e1, e5. Rook takes e5. Resigns. Where did that come from? The clues are all there. The king is stuck in the center, the f6 pawn is pinned, the e7 bishop can only be protected by the king and queen, the light-squared bishop is loose. Queen h5 check is tempting, but bishop g6 covers. The sacrifice must be taken as the f5 bishop is attacked and, if it moves, bishop takes f6 follows. After rook takes e5. F takes e5, the fun starts. Queen h5 check, bishop g6, else the bishop drops with check, queen takes e5, attacking the rook, rook f8, rook e1. And there's no good way to defend the bishop and escape the deadly discovered checks that will follow. Notice that with the king in the center it's more difficult for the rooks to come to the 7th rank and help defend the pinned piece. Key lessons. When the king is in the center, look for ways to open lines and control the squares around him. Notice how the bishop on c4 controls f7. Make use of pins and other tactical means to get aggressive squares for your pieces, even if it is only short term. Take note of unprotected pieces and those that can only be defended once or twice. Make sure you can bring in extra firepower quickly and preferably with tempo, either a check or a threat. See Rook e1. This is the type of position you will come across regularly in your own games. Would you find Rook takes e5? Notice the clues, king in the center, loose pieces, pins, and you'll soon be finding these and far more difficult moves with relative ease. This is an instructive lesson, designed to teach club players how to think like a GM and break out of the under 2000 category. We were examining positions where club players tend to choose inferior moves based on a misunderstanding. When you begin to see the position the way a GM sees it, the best moves become almost obvious. By careful study of this lessons, you will be able to transform your understanding of chess, and enjoy all the success that comes from constantly finding GM-level moves. How to attack like a GM. Today I'm going to show you another instructive attack, for club players who want to reach 2000 plus ELO. This game shows just how quickly we can create a winning attack. Take a look at this position. You've probably had many very similar positions yourself, right? Would you believe me if I said White, an English Grandmaster, would be forced to resign in just 9 moves' time? White has played h3, kicking at the bishop. Do we give up our bishop or break the pin on the knight and allow knight takes e5? Bishop h5, g4, bishop g6, knight takes e5. Now we can capture the e4 pawn, but it seems to lose material. Knight takes e4, knight takes bishop, wins for white. Bishop takes pawn on e4, g5. Now what? If the knight moves, the bishop is lost. Well, this was black's plan all along. Let's look at what's happened. White has weakened the protection of his king by advancing the g and h pawns. We have a dangerous bishop raking across the king, if we can keep it there, and the e5 knight is undefended. What you need to notice is if white captures our knight, he will be opening up the g-file, very risky when his king resides there. If we take back with our g-pawn, we'd be able to play rook g8 check later. Let's play it now. Rook g8. If pawn takes pawn check, knight g4, f5, wins back the material with continued pressure against the king. One line you might like to look at is king h2, queen d6 check, f4, rook takes knight. Pawn takes rook, queen h6 check, king g1, bishop c5 check, d4, bishop takes pawn check, bishop e3, queen h1 check, king f2, queen h4 check, king g1, queen g3 check, with mate next move. Instead of pawn takes knight, white played d3, bishop f5, rook e1, hoping for an attack along the e-file, bishop takes h3, king h2. A logical move is it attacks our bishop and moves off the g-file. White can win material without being exposed to a discovered check. However, the open file will still prove to be deadly. Bishop e6. Escaping and blocking the e-file, releasing the pin on the other bishop. Pawn takes knight, pawn takes pawn, knight f3, the fatal error. Queen d5. On our way to the h-file, white desperately tries to put a piece in between us and his king. King h1, bishop d6. Attacking the h2 square, there is no good defense to queen h5 check, so white resigns. If a GM can be beaten that quickly, you can bet many of your opponents can too. I'm sure you could find most of black's moves pretty easily too. Key lessons. If your opponent moves the pawns in front of his king, look for ways to open the file. Make it as tempting as possible for your opponent to take your bait. In this game white wouldn't capture our knight when we could recapture with check, but did when he'd moved his king off the g-file. If the king is trapped on the side of the board, look for checkmating patterns immediately. Involve as many of your pieces as necessary to control the squares around the king and overwhelm the defense bishop d6 in the game. As you can see, a lot of what GMs do is easy to understand when you know what you're trying to achieve. For strong players, certain moves act as triggers for winning plans. In this case, the advance of the g-pawn was a sign black could start attacking the king's position. If you want, you can learn a ton of triggers, winning plans and new ways of looking at the position in front of you. In our next videos, we cover topics including advanced attacking formations, the secrets of successful defense, how to see more moves ahead and calculate quickly and accurately, plus subtle strategies that win without your opponent realizing they're losing, until it's too late. If you're ready to take your game to the next level, continue to watch this training course. Focus on the presented material, and study it carefully.